In this video, we will review the structure and function of the endocrine system. Our endocrine system consists of cells, tissues, and organs that secrete hormones. The major player in this system are the endocrine glands. The primary function of endocrine glands is to secrete hormones directly into the surrounding fluid, and then the interstitial fluid and blood vessels transport these hormones throughout the body. Hormones are chemical messengers that are responsible for the flow of information between different tissues and organs. Many of our hormones come from glands throughout the body whose primary function is the secretion of hormones. These are things like the hypothalamus, the thyroid gland, and our adrenal glands. Other hormones come from organs that, as a secondary function, also contain endocrine cells and tissues. This would include the pancreas, the heart, and the kidneys. We have different types of hormone secretions throughout the body. A cell may signal itself through an autocrine signaling. Cells may talk to nearby cells through paracrine signaling. But in the endocrine system, we're talking about distant signaling, where one gland will release hormones that act on a distant target cell. We have two different types of hormones in the body. We have those that are hydrophilic, that are able to freely circulate in water because they are water soluble, and we have those that are lipophilic or fat soluble. Our peptide and protein hormones are water soluble or hydrophilic. Because of this, they can freely circulate in the blood without any kind of carrier protein or chaperone. However, these hormones have a short lifespan. Our fat-soluble or lipophilic hormones are things like steroid and thyroid hormones. These fat-soluble hormones require carrier proteins, so they need a chaperone to carry them through the blood. These hormones are lipophilic or lipid-soluble because they're synthesized from cholesterol. And when they're bound to carrier proteins, these hormones are not active. When these hormones reach their target cell, how that cell responds to the hormone depends on how likely the hormone is to bind to that receptor. We have two terms you should understand regarding hormone signaling. The first is affinity. This is how well do these receptors bind the hormone? Are they easily bound, or does it take a little bit of work? A high affinity is when you have a key that you slip into that door and it easily fits and turns. A lower affinity is that one key that you have to wiggle and kind of get in just right in order for it to fit into that lock. Another concept you should understand is that the number of receptors can also control how a cell responds to a hormone. If there's more receptors available, we call this upregulation. That means that cell is more sensitive to the hormone. It's more likely to have a response to that hormone. It could also mean it requires a lower level of hormone to get a robust response. Downregulation means fewer receptors are available, and that cell is less sensitive to a hormone. This might mean that you might need more hormone to get a cellular response. We'll now talk about two types of receptors. The first are cell surface receptors. These are receptors found within the cell membrane. These bind to our water-soluble hormones, so our peptides and our proteins. These cell surface receptors act as what we call a first messenger, where it binds that signaling protein, that hormone, and then sets off this cascade of event within the cell to perpetuate that signal. This often uses a particular type of signaling protein called a G protein. This G protein is found inside the cell membrane, and it's responsible for activating this signaling cascade to get to our final protein product. So when a cell surface receptor binds a hormone, our first messenger, it sets off a series of enzymatic reactions. All of these proteins are pre-made and just need to be activated by some sort of signaling molecule. And so when you have cell surface receptors, that cell is going to have a fast response to this signaling because you're activating an existing protein. Our nuclear receptors work a little bit differently. Our nuclear receptors are bound by our lipid-soluble hormones, so things like steroid hormones and thyroid hormone. These hormones are able to pass through the cell membrane into the cytoplasm, and then they bind an intracellular receptor, which forms a complex. This complex then moves into the nucleus, where it binds something called a hormone response element. Binding of this hormone response element then activates or suppresses transcription. So it either turns on transcription or it turns off transcription. If it turns on transcription, it increases gene expression by creating more protein. If it turns off transcription, it decreases gene expression by not making a protein. So when you have nuclear receptors with our fat-soluble hormones, these lead to either upregulation or downregulation of proteins. Our endocrine system is regulated by feedback mechanisms, and this helps to regulate our endocrine cells so they can change their rate of hormone secretion to help maintain homeostasis. Our feedback systems include negative feedback, hypothalamic-pituitary target cell feedback, and positive feedback. The most common mechanism of hormone control is negative feedback. Big picture, this means some feature of the hormone action will either directly or indirectly inhibit further hormone secretion so that the hormone level will return to set point. So let's look at this in a more specific example to help you understand. In our example here, you can see that there's an imbalance in the blood. So the hypothalamus is going to say, we don't have enough glucocorticoids in our blood, so we have sensors that signal that. The hypothalamus will then release the corticotropin-releasing hormone. This is a hormone that then goes through a cascade that eventually will trigger the adrenal gland to release glucocorticoid in the blood. Once the glucocorticoid levels in the blood reach a particular set point, that then goes back and tells the hypothalamus, okay, hey, we've got enough glucocorticoid. I don't need you to make any more corticotropin-releasing hormone. And that is the negative feedback that shuts off the release of corticotropin-releasing hormone. Basically, negative feedback means that when you reach your desired set point, that goes and turns off the system. For example, when you have your air conditioner on and you have it set to 72, when that thermostat detects that your room is now at 72 degrees, that then signals your air conditioner to turn off. That's negative feedback. Let's look at one more example just to make sure we're on the same page. Let's say that your thyroid hormone levels are too low. So the hypothalamus will release a hormone, thyrotropic releasing hormone, that then will signal to the anterior pituitary, hey, we need some thyroid stimulating hormone. We need to tell the thyroid to make thyroid hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone then goes to the thyroid and says, hey, thyroid, we need you to make some thyroid hormone. So the thyroid makes our thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. Once those thyroid hormones reach our set point, our desired level, that then signals the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus to stop making hormones so that we don't make more thyroid hormone. When we reach the desired level of thyroid hormone, that turns off the production of that signal. Let's look a little bit about hypothalamic-pituitary target cell feedback. So our hypothalamus, as you saw in the last two examples, produces a releasing hormone, which then travels to the anterior pituitary, where it releases what we call a tropic hormone, or the hormone that then signals our target gland. Our tropic hormone will stimulate our peripheral target, so our adrenal glands or the thyroid gland, which then signals it to make a hormone. When the blood levels of a target hormone are where they want to be, this feeds back into the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary, decreasing that tropic hormone. This is how our hypothalamic anterior pituitary axis maintains homeostasis within a narrow range. Now, yes, this is exactly negative feedback. This is just looking at it in a broader context of how this occurs with relation to our hypothalamus. We also have positive feedback. We don't have a lot of systems that use positive feedback. In positive feedback, when the levels of a hormone rise, this causes another gland to release a hormone, stimulating more production of that hormone. So an example would be during the menstrual cycle, in the follicular phase, estradiol production leads to an increase of follicular stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary. This then leads to a further increase in estradiol levels. Another time we see this is in labor, when you want this forward feedback to increase the labor process during birth. And then finally, let's look at some mechanisms of hormone alterations. Let's look at some reasons why we might have hypofunction or the endocrine system isn't functioning enough. Sometimes this comes from congenital deficits where maybe a particular gland is not fully developed or is missing some sort of key regulatory protein or enzyme. There could be a destruction of a gland, so maybe inflammation, infection, ischemia where you don't have enough blood flow, autoimmune disease, cancer has destroyed the gland and it's just not making enough of that hormone. The gland could decrease in size and function due to aging or atrophy. Or there could be a dysfunction in the hormone receptor and the gland itself is okay. And then you can also have hyperfunction of a gland. And this is where the effects of a gland are overproduced. This is usually because there is excessive production of a hormone. Either there's excessive stimulation, maybe coming from the hypothalamus or the pituitary gland. You could have hyperplasia, where you have an increase in the size of the gland, and so now you're making more hormone, maybe like with a goiter. Or you could have a tumor that is producing excess hormone. So this is an overview of the structure and function of the endocrine system.